Hey, welcome back. This is Jess, co-founder here at Pristine Podcasts, and I just came across the podcast download report fall 2021, and I was just saying earlier, I remember the professor that we had at uni who was used to say, don't trust a study that you haven't faked yourself. And I just saw another report thing come in like a couple of days ago, and that one just looked totally bogus to me. So I'm glad to be looking at a report that actually seems to be containing some useful numbers. I mean, the sample sizes were still fairly small, as in they were like in the hundreds, which is not a huge audience to be polling on things like this, but the outcomes seem to be pretty realistic and in line with what I've experienced and what people have shared. So I wanted to take a minute to dive into the report together to see what that means for us as podcasters in 2021, 2022 and beyond, to see what the trends kind of are at the moment. So I went through the whole thing and I highlighted some bits that I thought were particularly relevant. There is more information inside the report, but for us and our audience, I've picked out the things that are like the most relevant. So the first thing is that at the moment, we're looking at 28% of Americans, and this report is focusing on US, and they had some Canadian data in there as well. But I am not assuming that any European data is included in here, which I think is a huge waste. But obviously, it takes a lot of time to be gathering this information and to then assemble it, and it's probably not worth the effort. So at the moment, we're looking at US numbers, from what I could gather. So 28% of Americans are weekly podcast listeners, and we're looking at an average of 4.8 podcast episodes in the past week, so almost 5 episodes. So I'm assuming that for the majority of people, it's going to be their, favorite shows mostly on rotation. And I found it interesting that people actually are using more than one podcast platform as well. I don't really think it makes a huge difference as to what platform the person uses to access the content, because wherever possible, get your show out there onto all of the platforms so that you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff that, somebody might not be able to find you. But yeah, I thought it was interesting because I also use more than one app to listen to podcasts. I use Good Pods to discover new stuff that I haven't known about before and the kind of social side of it. And then I use Air because I like to be able to quote and share quotes from the episodes and save them in Notion because, it sparks ideas for me. So Air is kind of an amazing thing that allows me to do that and share it and have audio quotes, which I love. So I thought it was interesting that there's other people who use more than one app. Now, the thing that I found very interesting is that there is a huge amount of people that have only just gotten into podcasting in the past year. They're still outnumbered by the podcast pioneers who've been around for more than 4 years, but the number's still growing. And at this point in time, the listenership is split almost 50-50 between males and females. So I found that very interesting. Now, looking at the heavy podcast listeners, though, we can already see that things are changing. So the people who are actually listening to more than 6 hours of podcasts in the past week are mostly between 18 and 34. So it is the younger demographic listening to a large number of podcasts, and the majority of them are actually male, and the majority of them have been listening to podcasts for multiple years, and they're managing almost double the number of episodes than the people who are just, listening to podcasts every single week. So that's very interesting, and I think it shows that podcasting is something that really grows on people. Like, I remember I've been listening to podcasts since they first came out, but never regularly. So I would listen to podcasts for like a few weeks, and then I would kind of get bored of that show, and then I would get into another one. But I didn't feel like there was like a large amount of choice, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of depth. And lots of people would do shows for a few months and then stop. So I kind of stopped listening. However, I find that now the selection of shows that I am interested in has hugely gone up, and that's, pulled me back time and time again to a point where now I for sure listen. I mean, not just client stuff. I mean, if we counted out client stuff, then we'd be listening to 50 hours, 100 hours of podcasts per week. But obviously, I for sure listen to more than 6 hours of podcasts in a week, because I know lots of them that are really amazing, and I really don't have enough time to listen to all the things that I find particularly interesting. So I think it's something where if we do get somebody into podcasting, they are going to be around for the long term, and they're most likely going to listen to more and more content as they, enjoy the medium and find shows that they love. I find it takes time. The search functions aren't amazing anywhere, and there's very little apps like Good Pods that, where you could add your friends and you could see what your friends are listening to, and you could then find more shows that you're interested in. That hasn't really grown very much yet. So those people that started listening more than 4 years ago, it's interesting. A lot of them are actually a little bit older. So it's something where there's obviously a passion for a specific thing that's been around for a time longer than these kind of newer listeners who seem to be mostly younger. And those podcast pioneers who started listening a long time ago also listen to more episodes than just your average podcast listener. So although they aren't exactly heavy listeners by default, they are still listening to an average that's 31% greater than your bog standard weekly podcast listener. So I thought that was interesting. And still the majority of them are male. So we'll see the women come up in a minute, which I also thought was very interesting. But yeah, so the people who've been listening to podcasts for a while, mostly male and actually a little bit older. So podcasting is only kind of just coming in for the younger generation. Then who started listening in the past year? So we have 28% of people that started listening to podcasts in the past year. And what's interesting to see here is that here is where our younger demographic is. And interestingly, 60% of those people who've started listening in the past year are actually female. And a very small percentage of them are heavy listeners. So that, combined with the information that the heavy listeners are mostly people that have been listening to podcasts for more than 4 years, tells me that podcasting is still a medium that takes time for people to get into. And I wouldn't be surprised if, somebody was following someone who had a podcast and they were kind of listening to their podcast, but then they got bored of it, but then they didn't have another one that they wanted to listen to instead. So they kind of drop off a bit and then they come back with a different one. And then slowly, as more people are making content that is specific for them in that medium, they will kind of stick around and they will engage more and more. Now, the people who've been listening to podcasts for a long time are listening to more podcasts and, they spend more time, but they're also listening to more episodes, which makes perfect sense because they've been at it for way longer. Now, the thing that came up next I thought was very interesting, and it is that podcast listeners are actually the people who are using streaming services, and that is a huge thing. The two top streaming services people were using were Netflix and Amazon Prime. Now, the interesting thing is that both of those platforms offer video on demand with no advertising. So in the past month, 91% of weekly podcast listeners have watched commercial-free video streaming. So generally, we would be sitting at home at night, putting on the TV, listening to movies we've seen 100 times and then being bombarded with ads that, come every 15 minutes and are 10 minutes long. These people, they're not accessing as much, and we're going to come onto TV in a second, if any, television. Therefore, they are not receiving any ads. So this is a group where advertising money is kind of getting a little bit lost at the moment because you can't reach them via TV or radio. Now, what's also interesting is that 39% of people don't have a pay TV, cable TV, or anything TV subscription, and we're in that category as well. Interestingly, we have a TV in our house, but we just have like YouTube or Netflix on it. So I actually don't watch any TV and haven't done so for, I don't know, 4 years, 3.5 years since I really started cutting down on actually watching TV. So yeah, you would not be able to advertise your products to me as a consumer via television or anything like that. Like, I would hear the radio, but I would only hear the radio in the car, and I wouldn't be looking up something while I'm driving. And by the time I'm done with driving, I won't remember the ad that I heard 15 minutes ago unless I was looking for that specific service. So we are actually, interestingly, in the group of people who you wouldn't be able to target with TV advertising. But I do listen to podcasts, and that's what I thought was very interesting, because that puts podcasting into a prime position for advertising companies to be making more and more deals with podcasters, because the people who are not paying for TV are actually listening to podcasts. Now, interestingly, content-wise, difference between male and female audience, I would expect there to be. Male audience, news, current events, sports, comedy, tech, business. Female, we had storytelling, drama, true crime. I don't know what it is with true crime. I'm really not into it, but I know so many people that are. And if you are, tell me what it is about true crime that interests you. I am like, maybe I haven't just found the right thing to listen to, but yeah. Entertainment, pop culture, comedy, and then we have news, current events, education, health, and those kind of things. So very interesting that business is at 12% of female listeners versus 37% of male listeners. So there's still a huge difference there. Kids and family increased. So yeah, still some gender differences that, are a bit outdated, but still a thing. Age-wise, it seems that the younger audience is preferring the storytelling, drama, true crime, and older audiences are more into news and current events, which is interesting. Then this was something that I thought was pretty cool. So of all of the weekly podcast listeners, 42% will listen to your episode within 24 hours of the thing publishing. So we're always wondering, when we're looking at our download numbers, which download numbers matter. And for sure, I would say comparing your downloads at 24 hours and comparing your downloads at 7 days would give you a realistic picture of how many downloads you can expect, because the majority of them don't, come after 7 days. It's only I will mostly listen that day or the day after if everyone publishes on the same day. I just don't have enough time, so I can't. And then I will only listen to podcasts that are older than 7 days if I'm binge listening your show, and then I will go back to the beginning and I will listen to all of the ones that grab my interest by the title. So that would make sense. And the heavy podcast listeners, you have almost 62% of them downloading your episodes within a day. So I think it's a thing on how much time you just allocate towards something. So definitely get the 24-hour download number and get the 7-day download number if you're interested. Or listen to a podcast episode about numbers, and which numbers are really way more useful than your download numbers. But, that's a different story. Now, a podcast subscription option, we talk a lot about actually getting paid for all of this free content that you're creating, and that is perfectly okay, to have people pay for something that they enjoy accessing. If your favorite podcast offered a subscription option which provided exclusive benefits for a monthly fee, which of the following would you be willing to pay for? Bonus episodes, 35% would be willing to pay for bonus episodes. Now imagine if, I don't know what your audience size is right now, but imagine 1/3 of those people would like to pay you $10 a month for you to make 1 or 2 bonus episodes a month. How many people would be willing to pay you, and how much money are you leaving on the table right now because you don't want to make 1 or 2 extra videos a month? Now compare that to the amount of hours that you have to put into your full-time job or into servicing your clients if you have a business. this is money that you're leaving on the table. Access to extended episodes. So we all cut, like, I don't know how much, but we sometimes cut as much as 20% out of clients' episodes. More if they're longer co-host, storytelling, entertainment type podcasts. There's lots of personal stories that get shared that we get to hear and nobody else does. So you could just upload the full unedited version of the podcast, and your audience would love it. You know, of course, it only works if you don't just cut out the ums and ahs, but you have actual, you know, heavily redacted episodes. But that kind of stuff works. People would pay for early access to episodes, and then we have all the other stuff. We have behind the scenes content, live chats with hosts, Q&As, and then we have the not so popular options, transcripts at 8%. I don't think transcripts is something that you should be making people pay for personally. That's my opinion. I guess I feel like providing a transcript is just a courtesy thing for everyone that needs it or whatever. I think if you are having the podcast on the website, then putting a transcript there is only going to help you from a getting your episode found perspective, and it's not going to hurt you very much. So I think it's totally worthwhile doing. You should do it anyways, and you shouldn't expect people to pay for it. But that's my view on that. Exclusive physical merchandise. Physical merchandise is always the go-to thing for so many people, but it's actually way harder to sell than getting, you know, more content to people. And that's been consistently, you know, happening for people where they're like, oh yeah, I put out merch, but nobody's buying it. And I'm like, yep, people are not that obsessed necessarily with identifying with your cause yet. So that comes a bit later. So I'm not surprised that that's the outcome there. Now, interesting, there's been way more development on the social audio platforms. So platforms like Clubhouse have been getting way more popular this year. So how familiar are you with each of the following audio-based social networking apps and features? So these are the people who were kind of familiar with those. And there was Clubhouse, Facebook Live Audio, Twitter Spaces, Reddit Talk at the top. However, this includes people that have just heard of it, but they're not really familiar with using it. So this doesn't mean that we all need to be running to Clubhouse. Like, I don't know, I didn't even make an account on Clubhouse, which I decided like I will do just to like look at it, but I don't really have time to be like in another place. So something would have to go. So I'd have to, for example, cut out being on Instagram to replace it with something else, just because that is the amount of time and patience that I have in the day to be connecting with people. So while I love the idea of it, I did not do what everyone did all year long, which is to like have like a mass exodus and like beg people to get me invites to a platform. And that's where I think lots of people are at still. Like, none of the people that I personally know in real life that don't have businesses are on Clubhouse. Some of them do listen to podcasts, but, you know, they're not active on those platforms and I can't really see them get into it just now. So yeah, it's still a developing kind of audience. Interestingly, Spotify has knocked Apple Podcasts off of the top spot as far as podcast apps go. So we now have Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts at the top. And then, interestingly, 14% of people will listen to a podcast on the website of the person who produced the podcast, which I think is always important for business owners. Like, lots of my downloads are happening on our website, not in a podcasting app, because I guess people are researching, you know, how to start their show, how to grow their show. They're in front of the laptop, they come across the blog article and they listen to the episode. So we're getting lots of people who are downloading the episode in that way. And I could see that being the case for other people as well. Other popular apps that I know loads of people use that have businesses like Pocket Cast and Overcast are coming into a very, very, very small category over here. So that I thought was interesting to mention as well. Now, they asked some interesting questions, including this, where they basically asked which brand they associate with specific product attributes. Like, which brand has your favorite podcasts? And people said Spotify. Which brand was easiest to use? And people said YouTube or Spotify. Which brand has a useful search function? That for sure is an Apple Podcast, because I can never find anything in there. But, you know, people said YouTube, and Of course, YouTube is a search engine for video, so it has a good search function. But people said, I don't know, about loads of things. And that tells me that this is way still not a hugely developed industry. So the ability to download podcasts for free for offline listening, don't know. Automatically downloading your favorite new episodes, don't know. Receive notifications when there's a new episode, don't know. Like, the reason why I use Good Pods is because Good Pods tells me very reliably when there's a new episode for a podcast I'm subscribed to, and I can just go listen to it straight away. So that's how I still use Good Pods to listen to so many things, and I haven't opened Apple Podcasts in weeks, although I still have it on my phone, just because I don't know when there's a new episode. For some reason, they don't tell me. Maybe it's a setting I should have turned on, but my answer is, I don't know. But Good Pods does, so I like using it. Compatible with smart speakers, don't know. Exclusive podcasts, don't know. Changing the speed of an episode, don't know. Premium subscription, don't know. 34% don't know where they would access premium subscriptions. So here, I think we could potentially also do a large amount of education within our own audiences to say, hey, by the way, like, let me do you a quick live video on how you can best consume your podcasts. How can you best share it? How can you share it with people that are already in your network or with new people that you don't know yet? And this is where we can contribute to the education as well. Because the easier we make it for people to access our content, to listen to our podcasts, even via their smart speaker, the more downloads we're going to get. Because people can be like, oh, I have to, I don't know, tidy up around the house. Let me ask Alexa to play my favorite podcast, you know. So those are all things where if we're sharing people and training them how to access our content, then it's going to benefit us as a whole, because it makes it more likely for people to do so. There were a few slides then on advertising, which also was very interesting. There were way more detailed numbers than these. These were like the summary, and I didn't want to go into too much detail on this, but 45% of the brands they asked, and that's where I said sample size 300, not very much, but 45% did currently advertise in podcasts. And then on another question, it was 71% who have discussed podcast advertising as a potential for media investment. So brands are becoming more and more aware of podcasts as a potential platform for them to advertise their products. Now, these were some things that I thought were interesting when it came to what do people do after they heard an advertisement of sorts. And now, wait, can I make this a bit bigger? So heavy podcast listeners are the dark ones, and the grey ones are the total weekly podcast listeners, which was, I think, like 28% of Americans or something. So 45% versus 54% of regular listeners versus heavy listeners searched online for more information. 40% of heavy listeners discovered a new product or service they've never heard of. 29% talked to friends or acquaintances about the product, so this started a conversation. 29% of heavy listeners actually purchased the product or service. 30% used a promotional code from the podcast, which I've done plenty of times. 24% followed the brand, product, whatever on social media to hear more about it. So you can see that the more we are getting people to listen to our podcasts for long periods of time and to listen to other people's podcasts as well, not just yours, but other people's as well, the more likely people are to be, getting to know us, to like us, to trust us, to respect our opinion, to consider our recommendations for things. And that is why it's so important that we don't take any old sponsorship from people, but we actually work with sponsors where we agree with the brand, the value, we've used the product. There's very few products that I actually have used over the last 6 years, and my opinion has changed. Like, I used to, for example, back when the scheduling software was still called Acuity, I used to use them and I used to love them, and I was a heavy affiliate. However, they've recently been bought by Squarespace, and Squarespace knows how to do one thing really well, in my opinion, and that is to break products that were working perfectly fine beforehand. So I find their website building super clunky. They still only integrate like with MailChimp, like, what century is it to only be integrating with one email service provider? Like, really? So to me, this is like an antiquated software, just like MailChimp, just like other ones, and I will never advertise or vouch for them. However, I've used ConvertKit for 6 years. I've been a certified expert. I still use them myself again and again and again because I like them so much. So it is just something where you need to make sure that those heavy listeners who are listening to your shows and other people's shows can actually trust your judgment, that you're not just advertising that service because they're paying you money. And I think that remains true more than ever. I thought it was interesting that people considered still that 2 ads in a 30-minute podcast and almost 4 ads in a 60-minute podcast are acceptable. So we have clients who are literally not even putting, more than one call to action for their own thing that they're doing inside their podcast episodes, and they already feel bad about it because they're like, hey, I'm interrupting the episode, or I'm putting this in the beginning and people don't want to hear it. Well, actually, it seems that still, even since 2017, people are okay to be hearing you advertise for things, For me, in a 60-minute podcast, if it's short, like if you're saying, hey, and don't forget to check out, you could put loads of those ads in there. I wouldn't care. But if you're going to interrupt the show for like 1 minute at a time, I'm getting annoyed after the second one. But that's, I'm not a consumer. I'm kind of there to like learn stuff. I listen on faster speed and all that good stuff. So I don't really want to hear loads of ads, particularly when it's the same ad every single week. But yeah, it just is what it is. So people seem to be even more patient than I am. So do put ads, do tell people about your stuff, your services, your challenge that you're doing. Like, tell people about it, for God's sake. They want to hear about it. Consistently, people are still preferring ads that are voiced by the show's host, which I don't know. I don't think we're editing anyone at the moment who has ads that are, like a radio ad or anything. So for me, this would be like the standard thing that I would expect. I think I only listen to 2 podcasts who have more radio style advertisement, and I don't actually know what they're advertising because I haven't listened to a single one of them. I just hear the man's voice coming, and now we're going to tell you about, and I immediately switch off because it's like drama level has just gone through the roof. Whereas if you're saying, hey, I use this product, it's called X, I use it for Y, and I really like it because Z, I've listened to it because it's still you talking. So yeah, I definitely think I would prefer if people stuck with voicing their own ads and not having the male voice, the very dramatic radio ad. Kind of, I don't know, you've lost me. So that was the last of the slides. So they do have the full data in it as well. So if you scroll, anyway, it doesn't scroll very well, does it? It has to load first. It has to be a bit slow. So there's way more info in here. I just kind of like picked out the top things that I thought were particularly interesting, seeing that the majority of you guys are business owners. So more and more women are coming into podcasting. So, here at the bottom, the further you go, it won't let me. Okay, well, whatever. Believe me that all the way at the bottom of this report, you will get tables and tables with the actual numbers in it if you want to compare them. But I keep still hearing it. Women don't listen to podcasts. Only men listen to podcasts. Yes, they do. More and more recently. Podcasting is a fad. It's going to go away. Actually, podcasting has been around for a long time, and the people who've been in it for a long time are consuming a lot of it. Podcasting is already completely oversaturated. No, it's not. Like 28% of Americans are listening to a podcast once a week. That means 70% of Americans never listen to podcasts, and those 28% are not heavy listeners. So they still watch a ton of TV instead of listening to podcasts. So there is major room for growth. And just the fact that people don't even know how to best access all the different types of content, or which app is the best one for them to use, all of that tells me that we have a huge learning curve, because if you asked your average person on the street, they can now totally lecture you about all the TV options if they've recently bought a TV, and they'll tell you about all the different screens and which one's best for what and whatever. They don't know that same level of detail about podcasts. And until we get to that point, there is always room for growth. And these are just the numbers in the US. There was a slide that compared numbers in Canada. But otherwise, no one has mentioned anything about Europe. And at the moment, I don't know if I can trust my PodTrack data or not, but at the moment, the majority of our listeners are Europeans, Japan, Korea. Like, I've got huge download numbers that are outside the US. So I'm not even sure how much this differs with the European audience, and most likely no one's going to check for a very long time. So, yeah. So that's some of my thoughts on this. I would love to know what you think. Leave me a comment. Tell me about the stuff that you thought was most fascinating, or come and join our Facebook group. I will share that in there as well, but it's pristinepodcast.com/group. If you go there, you will hop over to Facebook, and then you can come and join our group, and you can tell me what you thought of this report, and if there's anything that you thought has recently changed that you are very excited about. Yeah, that's it from me. Don't forget to check out the podcast, and yep, I'll see you around for the next video.